Having one foot in Europe and one foot in the Middle East, Turkey's geographical and political position in the world means it has a particularly important role to play in the stability of world politics. The country's steady lean towards the Islamic faith is a story that started roughly a century ago, when Turkey was revolutionized under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. I'm your host, Lewis, and welcome to Caspian Report. During World War I, when the Ottomans were defeated and the British, French, Greeks, Armenians and the Italians occupied the region, the Turkish nationalist movement, led by Ataturk, responded with a war of liberation. Ataturk, literally meaning father of the Turks, was a renowned military commander who had led his troops defending Gallipoli during the Great War. His movement fought for independence and the creation of a new Turkish republic, yet Ataturk was a modernist who believed in science, rationality, and secularism. His nationalist movement had its roots in the Young Turks. These were exiles, students, and army officers who had training and education in the West and had also come to believe in ideals like the scientific method, the Enlightenment, and the French revolutionary tradition that espoused universal rights and citizenship. Ataturk founded the Republican People's Party in 1919, and against all odds, he pushed the foreign powers out. In 1923, Turkey was born. But under what principles was this new state to be developed? How would Ataturk build a modern nation? To address this fundamental question, Ataturk and his party designed what came to be known as Kemalism, a philosophy based around a synthesis of Western ideas. This was made up of 6 arrows. The first principle, or arrow, republicanism, firmly established that sovereignty lay with the people. There would be no more sultans, but this didn't necessarily lead to democracy in the European or American sense. During the 30s, under the shadow of World War I and the Great Depression, Western-style capitalism appeared to many as a failing system, while parliamentary democracy seemed like a never-ending series of squabbles. Because of this, Kemalists favoured a strong state, and silenced and repressed many opponents and alternative parties. Which leads to the second principle, nationalism. This had a very different meaning than it does today. Nationalism simply implied that nations had the right to self-determination, and that no nation has a right to expand through imperial or colonial endeavours. It also meant that, as was written in the new constitution, the people of Turkey, regardless of religion and race, are Turks as regards to citizenship. The third principle was populism, again something that has started to take on a more nefarious meaning today, but had a more neutral definition at the time. Ataturk said in a speech in 1920 that, "I believe the essential reason of our existence now has proven the general tendency of our nation, and it is populism and people's government. It is the taking over of the government by the people." Complementing the first two principles then, populism meant that sovereignty lay with the people within national borders. Populism, though, also implies some kind of unity of the people. Turkish unity should supersede class or religious conflict. Which led to the fourth principle, etatism. This was a belief in the power of the state to get involved in areas of the economy that private industry was incapable of or proved inept at managing. Inspired by the Soviet Union without being communist, etatism is ultimately a socialist principle. The fifth principle was secularism. The Kemalist interpretation of secularism had more in common with French laïcism than the American understanding. Laïcism didn't mean the separation of religion and the state, but the control of religion by the state to keep it out of the public sphere by, for example, controlling the somewhat 80,000 mosques in the country, even though Muslims made up 97% of the total population. This had much in common with Etatism, that the state should have control over the direction of the country, and that Islam was a conservative force that needed to be kept in check. Like most political concepts, Ataturk recognised that political interpretations change over time. Reformism, then, would be the sixth arrow. The ability to adjust a political movement to new circumstances was critical to the success of all the previous principles. So, understood through these 6 principles, new institutions were formed and a new culture was created. But much of the population was made up of the peasantry, who could neither read nor make sense of this new culture. Islam was also, of course, a dominant part of their lives. For Kemalism to be successful then, material and economic gains would be fundamental. The state invested in and monopolised many industries, like shipping and manufacturing, during the 1930s, with great success. Kemalism, though, has not been without its critics. Following the death of Ataturk in 1938, the members of the ruling party increasingly disagreed on the interpretation of the philosophy. Eventually, following the military coup of 1960, the fringe factions within the Republican People's Party started turning against each other. Left-wing party members started to view Kemalism as an anti-imperial socialist revolution, and like-minded university students and the masses from the working class sided with the left. Meanwhile, right-wing Kemalists became alarmed by this socialist attitude and used religion as a counterbalance as they found support amongst the rising middle classes in Anatolia. In essence, the friction was a reflection of the Cold War, where Islam was used as an antidote to communism. The discord between the left and the right severely weakened the Republican Party's grip over the government, and as a result, over the next decade, Turkey witnessed an era of radical politics. It is during this era that new splinter groups emerged, some of which fused with religious groups. In the 70s, Islam regained momentum as an important component of the Turkish identity. 2 Islamic grassroots movements in particular made significant gains. One was Fethullah Gulen's Islamic movement, which was a progressive form of Sunni Islamic theology that emphasized education and science. It had a huge following across the country. The other was Nesmettin Erbakan's Islamist parties, some of which served in a coalition with the Republican People's Party. Both Gulen and Erbakan sought to use state institutions to shape public opinion in favour of Islamic-based governance. In the following decades, there was a surge in the number of state-funded religious schools in Turkey. In addition, religious practices and customs increased, tolerance of non-practicing Muslims decreased, and gender equality declined in public life. At the same time, the military leadership came to consider itself the custodians of Turkey's secularist and Kemalist ideology, and thus continued to keep Islamist ideas in check. On 4 occasions, the military leadership ousted civilian governments that flirted with religious ideas, and each time the military returned political power to the civilian leadership. At the turn of the 21st century, religious influences entered the political realm as the geopolitical landscape changed. First, European leaders retreated from the EU's commitment to accept Turkey as a full member state. And second, the United States launched a military campaign in Iraq and reignited sectarian tensions in Turkey. The Turkish public felt largely abandoned by the events. Erdogan, whose political career began with Erbakan's organisation, aimed to capitalise on the changing global and local landscapes and offer the Turkish public an alternative to secular Kemalism. Having served as Istanbul's mayor from 1994 to 1998, Erdogan unified the top members of the Gulen and Erbakan movements and formed the Justice and Development Party in 2001. In the ensuing years, Erdogan strengthened the position of his party, doubled Turkey's GDP in the first 6 years of government, and largely avoided the effects of the 2008 financial crash. Like Kemalism roughly a century earlier, rapid modernisation has increased the popularity of Erdogan's policies and the strengthening of his executive powers. In doing so, Erdogan formulated a new political concept named Erdoganism, which was to rival Kemalism for the heart and soul of Turkey. Yet, if anything can be said of Turkey's turbulent political past, it's that the fight between the secular and the religious forces in the country is far from over. I've been your host, Lewis, and if you want to see more of my videos, then check out my channel then and now through the link in the description below. Thanks to the Caspian Report community on Patreon for giving us the means to produce new content. If you want to gain access to perks like PDF files, references, and early access, visit patreon.com/Caspian Report. All the funds help to keep Caspian Report independent and free of sponsors. And finally, let us know in the comments what you think of this collaboration between Then and Now and Caspian Report, and if you'd like to see more of it. Thanks for watching.